Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 54 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the Arizona Coyotes, in which the Sharks have lost 5-2. So the season continues to wind down here for the San Jose Sharks. Just 2 games remaining after this one on the schedule. And with the St. Louis Blues overtime loss tonight and the Kings regulation loss, all 4 teams in the West Division playoffs have been decided. The Golden Knights, the Avalanche, the Wild, and the Blues. And the Sharks, Coyotes, Ducks, and Kings will all be on the outside looking in. And one of the reasons is because the Sharks end up being involved in way too many games like this one. The Sharks found themselves in a lead rather early on in this one off of an Erik Karlsson goal to make it 1-0. And that would be the score at the end of a pretty solid first period for the San Jose Sharks. In the second period, in the first couple of minutes, the Sharks would actually manage to take a 2-0 lead off of a goal from Timo Meier. But soon after, the Coyotes would cut into that lead and get one back from Soderstrom. It had been, honestly, a while since we had seen a player score their first career goal against the San Jose Sharks. That used to be kind of a big thing for the San Jose Sharks. It felt like in the past few years that always seemed to be the case, but this season not so much, and that's probably because of the fact that the Sharks have only played against 7 different teams all season. But it was nice that we got a bit of a throwback here in this game. Not only Soderstrom getting his first goal, but later on, Yannick also getting his first career goal. But to continue on with the story, the middle part of the second period, the Coyotes would actually get a 5-on-3 for about a minute or so, and they would score on that from Connor Garland, and the game would be tied at 2. And that would be the score heading into the third period. It would then be where Phil Kessel, who had been sitting on 899 career points for a few games, really wanted to get that 900th career point, and especially against a team like the Sharks, who he has been scoring against a lot this season, he decides to do a bit of cherry picking and stands at the blue line, gets about 2 or 3 breakaways in the span of a few minutes, and actually manages to score on one of them to make it 3-2 Coyotes. The Sharks would soon after seemingly tie up. However, they would end up getting their goal called off, which would have been Erik Karlsson's second goal of the night, on the offside. And I have been very critical of the offside rule many times this season, usually because these offside reviews come from a play that was deemed offside 30 seconds or more prior to that, and the player was only offside by like a quarter inch. This type of goal, the one that the Sharks had called off here tonight, is kind of the kind of goal that this offside rule was definitely brought into place to prevent. This was one that occurred maybe 5-7 seconds prior to the actual goal being scored, and Tomas Hertl was a good foot or so offside, kind of reminiscent, maybe a bit less egregious, to the Matt Duchene goal that really sparked the interest in a rule like this existing. So anyway, after this goal gets called off, a few minutes later, the Coyotes would actually score to make it 4-2. Bunting would get that one. And eventually, as I said, Yannick would score an empty netter in the dying seconds, less than a second left in the third period, to make it a 5-2 victory for the Coyotes. So a game where the Sharks once led 2-0, they end up losing it by a score of 5-2. Not a great look. And as I said, one of the reasons that they are on the outside looking in of the West playoffs. First thing to talk about would be Koshinash. He gets the start here tonight. Obviously, no surprise in that regard. And his game, honestly, not terrible. I feel as though the Sharks were giving up way too many odd man opportunities on this one. As I said, Kessel had multiple breakaways, and that's partially due to that cherry picking, but also partially due to some sort of spotty defense from the San Jose Sharks. So that Kessel goal coming on a breakaway, Bunting goal also coming on. This one was not so much the Sharks' defensive fault. This was just an unfortunate situation. Evander Kane's stick breaks as he takes a shot from the blue line, which allows this Coyotes essentially 2-0 to occur. Bunting scores, not too much of a chance for Koshinash on that one. Garland's, it was one that goes through the 5-hole, so it's one that doesn't look particularly good, but then again, this was on a 5-on-3, and there's so much as a goaltender that you have to respect on the 5-on-3 that it's very difficult to really be able to keep up with all those saves. So while it doesn't necessarily look great, I wouldn't necessarily put a ton of blame onto him. The only one that I would say was not great was this Soderstrom goal. This was a very nice shot by Soderstrom, but the seas sort of parted for Koshinash. He kind of was able to see this puck and just seemingly a bit too much off of his angle on that one. In the end, I guess 4 goals on the game is not a great look for Koshinash, but I guess because of the situations that many of these goals were scored on, not awful either. We do suspect to see Melnishuk actually get the game tomorrow, and then for the final game of the season, which will come against the Vegas Golden Knights on Wednesday, while it is technically possible we will see Martin Jones for potentially one final time as a San Jose Shark, it also wouldn't surprise me and is maybe more likely that Koshinash gets that one. Next, I'll be talking about John Leonard. Unfortunately, Leonard was in the lineup here tonight, but he ended up tripping over himself, it seemed, and in the neutral zone and falling awkwardly into the boards at the Coyotes bench, and he was down for a good minute or two with seemingly no response. He was talking to the trainer, of course, so he knew that there wasn't anything extremely serious, but as he gets up, there's a ton of blood on his face, and so I'm going to make the very bold prediction that he probably won't play for the rest of this season, considering there's only 2 games left, and the Sharks, are not making any sort of push at all for anything. These 2 games have very, very little meaning in the grand scheme of things, so there's no reason to get Leonard back into the game at that point. So an unfortunate end to a season that in the end was okay for Leonard. He was probably hoping it would have gone a bit better for him, especially since he had some hype out of the gate. He was immediately on the second line for the San Jose Sharks for game 1 of the regular season, and by the end of it, he was barely scraping by with 7 or 8 minutes and sometimes even getting benched. So it probably didn't go as well as Leonard would have hoped for, but in the end, I guess not a terrible rookie season for the young forward either. And it should also be noted that while, an injury that has something to do with like the wrist or the arm or the ankle, the leg, the knee, these types of injuries can end up being something extremely long term, like we saw from someone like Radim Shemek when he got injured a couple of seasons ago. Considering this is something more so seemingly to do with the face, maybe a broken jaw or a broken nose or something like that, as long as it's not like a head-brain related injury, I suspect that while of course Leonard won't play these last couple of games, he should be 100% come next season. I mean, I'm not a doctor, so I can't say it for sure, and I don't know exactly what's wrong with him, but I will make that type of call anyway. Next, I'll be talking about Brinson Pasichnuk as he gets yet another game here for the San Jose Sharks. His first career game was also about a week ago against the Arizona Coyotes, and he draws back into the lineup here tonight in another game against Arizona, and honestly, still not looking all that great. I was able to chalk up that first game that he played as sort of rookie nerves as his first game at the NHL level, and so I wasn't going to read too much into that. Here tonight, maybe you could say it's the same thing, but once again, he does look a bit lost at time. There was one specific shift where I just felt as though he was puck watching to like the extreme. I've mentioned before that the Sharks as a team have been puck watching a lot this season, but Pasichnuk was doing it on another level where he didn't even seem to be reading the play at all and found himself 5 steps behind the Arizona Coyotes players multiple times in the defensive zone. So I felt as though not really a great game from Pasichnuk, and while we maybe will see him another point in these last couple of games, it would not surprise me, and I'd probably recommend him not getting any of these last 2. And finally, let's talk about Erik Karlsson. So talking about someone who is, more of an established player at the NHL level. I've mentioned time and time again that over these last few games, I'm going to be mentioning players that will play into the future of the San Jose Sharks more so. And while many people would like to try and explode the team and make a big rebuild happen for the San Jose Sharks this offseason, to move a player with a no movement clause like Erik Karlsson with 6 years left on $11.5 million, and an Erik Karlsson who is playing as he has been this season, it's very, 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 very likely that we will see Erik Karlsson back in Teal next season. So he technically will be a part of the fabric of this organization for a long while, because I will say that he will be back next season, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's back for the next 6 seasons of his contract. And I will say that it actually has been a pretty decent end to what has been a pretty up and down season for Erik Karlsson in general. At the start of the year, it was quite awful. Then he had a very, very strong middle part. Then he came back down from that and wasn't as awful as he was early on, but he was kind of floating around the average mark. But I feel though, as in his past few games, I would say maybe 2, 3, 4, he actually has looked a lot better now on a 2-game goal streak. He scored here tonight. He scored in the previous game. He almost had 2 goals here tonight off of a very nice shot that unfortunately Hertl was offside a few moments earlier. But just in general, I feel as though Karlsson has been playing better. And so even though the Sharks might not look to be super competitive next season, considering, as I said, Karlsson will likely be on this team for the next 6 years, and I suspect that the Sharks will be looking to be competitive at some point over this 6 years, it's good to see Erik Karlsson try and stay in form. Anyway, but that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action tomorrow as they will face off against the Arizona Coyotes once again in another game that will be essentially meaningless for any point besides maybe who can get a better draft position by the end of the season. With this loss here tonight, I don't believe that the Sharks can actually pass the Arizona Coyotes in the standing. The Coyotes sit at 52, the Sharks now at 48, so even if they win their last 2 games of the season, the Sharks do not have the tiebreaker on the Coyotes, so at the very least they've secured that, and I guess we'll see what happens tomorrow. Class dismissed.